Did you finish the cake? Answer me." Gavin's voice shook through the phone, trembling like someone desperate. I was about to tell him I hadn't eaten a single piece of the walnut cake he sent when he suddenly screamed, Don't eat it. Who did you give it to?" I froze. I had brought the box of cake to Gavin's house the night before and told Rebecca to share it with the kids. I heard my son's breath hitch, then the sound of something crashing on his end of the line. I didn't understand. But that reaction wasn't from someone worried his mother hadn't received a gift. It was the reaction of a man who had just lost control of his own plan. And in that moment, I knew whatever was in that box wasn't meant to celebrate my birthday. It was meant to end it. If you're still listening, tell me where you're watching from. Every comment you leave is another mark in this journey. And if this story has touched you, don't forget to hit like, so it can reach even further. I stayed silent for a few seconds, not because I didn't know what to say, but because my heart felt crushed tight, refusing to beat in its normal rhythm. On the other end, I heard Gavin gasping, footsteps pacing frantically, then a sharp scrape like a chair being yanked across the floor. "Gavin, what's happening, son?" I tried to steady my voice. "Answer me," he screamed again. "Who did you give it to? Did you eat any? Did anyone in your house eat it?" I sat down on the wooden chair by the kitchen window, looking out at my small garden covered in golden Oregon fall leaves. Everything looked peaceful, just like every other morning, except my son's voice didn't belong to that world. I took it to your house last night. Rebecca said the kids like nutcakes, so I thought... I didn't finish before Gavin let out a choked sound, like someone had just pressed a knife to his throat. "Oh, God, no. I heard more crashing, then curses, words I had never heard from his mouth when he was a little boy dragging his blanket to my room because he was afraid of the dark. "Gavin, talk to me. What's going on with the cake?" My voice was shaking now. He didn't answer immediately. All I heard were breaths, heavy, erratic, like someone losing his mind. Finally, Gavin forced out a sentence that chilled me to the bone. "Mom, do you know what you just did?" I stared at the empty cake box on my kitchen counter, the cream-colored box with a red ribbon tucked inside a paper bag printed with the logo of a fancy bakery in Seattle. Honestly, I had been surprised when I saw it. Gavin was never the type to buy anything luxurious for me. He had barely remembered my birthday in the 3 years since he married Rebecca. I hadn't expected anything this year either. I planned to buy myself a slice of apple pie, light a small candle, and spend the evening reading. But when I opened the door and saw that gift box sitting neatly on my porch, I smiled. A smile that now feels painfully naive. I even stood there for a moment in the warm afternoon light thinking, maybe my son still remembers me. Maybe things aren't as bad as I thought. I used to believe that. Even when Gavin slowly drifted away after marrying Rebecca, each phone call shorter, each hug colder. I still believed that somewhere inside him was the little boy I carried in my arms when he was 2 years old, the boy I adopted after the accident that took his birth parents. I poured all my love, money, and strength into raising him. But now, with Gavin's voice shaking like he was about to lose his mind, I understood something. The man shouting into the phone wasn't that boy anymore. I pressed again. "Tell me clearly, what's wrong with the cake?" Gavin was silent for a moment, then spoke hoarsely, each word squeezed from his throat. "Don't let anyone eat more. Don't let anyone eat anymore. Do you hear me?" My arms stiffened. Why eat more? Does that mean someone already ate? A cry burst through the phone, making my hair stand on end. It was Rebecca. I heard her scream, "Marjorie, Liam just threw up again. Emma's stomach hurts. I'm calling 911. My blood stopped flowing. The kids, my 2 grandchildren I loved more than life itself, had eaten the cake Gavin thought I would eat. I jumped up, dropping the mug in my hand. Rebecca, how are they? Oh, God, I didn't know. Rebecca didn't answer me. I only heard footsteps, a door opening, and the sound of her picking up one of the kids. Then the distant voice of a 911 operator echoed through the phone. I stood in my kitchen, legs giving out beneath me. My phone slid from my hand onto the table, but I didn't pick it up. It took a long moment before Gavin spoke again, each word sharp as a blade. Get them to the hospital now, and don't go anywhere. You ruined everything. That last sentence shattered me. I ruined everything? Me? I didn't answer. Gavin hung up before I could ask anything else. I sank into the chair, my hands trembling uncontrollably, fingers gripping the edge of the table. I didn't dare think the thought forming in my mind, but my heart, whether I wanted it or not, whispered something terrifying. Gavin wasn't afraid for me. He was afraid because his plan had gone wrong. It took nearly 2 minutes before I had enough breath to call an Uber to Gavin's house. I was shaking so badly I could barely buckle the seatbelt. I remember only saying to the driver, "Please, please hurry." A 15-minute drive turned into a trip straight into hell. I watched the world blur past. Rows of red maple trees, the cafe where I read the morning paper, Mr. Jim's convenience store where he sold candy to the kids. Everything felt foreign and terrifying. When the car stopped in front of Gavin's house, I heard ambulance sirens. Rebecca was carrying Emma. A paramedic carried Liam. The kids were pale, lips dry, eyes unfocused. I rushed toward them. "Rebecca, I'm sorry." "Oh, God, I didn't know," I said, my voice almost collapsing. Rebecca didn't look at me. She said, quickly, "They think it might be food poisoning, but something's wrong. The cake smelled metallic. I don't understand why Gavin keeps... She glanced around. "Where is he?" I shook my head. As the ambulance disappeared into the night, I stood alone in front of my son's house, a place I had visited hundreds of times, with Christmas gifts, home-baked cookies, toys for the kids. But tonight, only cold wind and terror filled that yard. Why had Gavin reacted like that? Why scream knowing I shared the cake? Why disappear when the kids got sick? I knew why. I didn't want to believe it, but I knew. My son had sent me a trap, and the ones who fell into it were my innocent grandchildren. In the second Uber chasing the ambulance to the hospital, I realized my 71-year-old life had just split into a before and an after. I didn't know then that what awaited me wasn't just the truth about that cake, but the truth about the son I raised for 40 years, and that this night was only the beginning of a storm that would tear my family apart. I arrived at the hospital so fast I don't remember walking through the ER doors. Only when my hand gripped the counter, chest heaving from running, did I realize I was inside. Rebecca stood there. Her eyes were red and swollen, mascara streaking down her face. When she saw me, she shook her head weakly and led me toward the pediatric emergency room. The door opened, and I saw Liam and Emma lying on hospital beds, tiny bodies under crisp white blankets, their skin an alarming shade of gray. The scene hit me like a winter wind through a broken window. I stepped closer. Liam, Emma, oh God. My voice trembled so hard each word felt separate from the next. Rebecca wiped her tears. The doctors are testing. They said it might be poisoning. I don't know. Her voice broke. I looked at the IV lines, the monitoring stickers on their little chests, and the terror in Rebecca's eyes. Even though she and I had never been close, I saw in her face the raw pain of a mother watching her children suffer. I turned to find Gavin. He was standing in the corner, pressed against the wall. His shoulders shook slightly, his hand gripping a water bottle so tightly his knuckles were white. His eyes avoided everything: Rebecca, me, even his own reflection. "Gavin," I whispered. He jolted like someone shaken awake from a nightmare. The water bottle slipped from his hand again, rolling across the floor with a hollow clatter. He bent to pick it up, but his hands were shaking uncontrollably. I walked closer. "Calm down. What happened?" Gavin didn't answer. He just backed farther into the wall as if trying to disappear inside it. Then the doctor walked in with a paper in his hand. "We have the preliminary results," he said, voice steady but tense. "The children show signs of exposure to an inorganic toxin. We're running further tests, but it strongly resembles arsenic." The entire room seemed to lose all air. Arsenic. I'd heard that word only in crime shows, not in a hospital room where my grandchildren lay motionless. Rebecca covered her mouth. Gavin looked like someone had punched the breath out of him. He lost his balance and braced himself against the wall. I saw it. The moment the water bottle slipped from his hand a second time. "Arsenic?" Rebecca asked, voice cracking. The doctor nodded. "We need to know everything they ate within the last 6 hours." Rebecca turned to me, her eyes wide and hollow. "Mom, where did that cake come from?" Her gaze pierced me. I swallowed hard. "Gavin sent it to me. It was for my birthday. I only brought it over because I thought the kids would like it." Rebecca froze. Her face shifted from fear to shock to a painful understanding. "Gavin, you," she whispered, but he cut her off. "Don't you dare say that," he snapped, his voice sharp like metal clashing. Rebecca stepped toward him, her eyes burning. "Don't say that? You freaked out the second Mom said she brought the cake. You disappeared for half an hour. You're hiding something, Gavin." He grabbed her shoulders, desperate, trembling. I said, "Stop talking." I had never seen my son like this. Not angry, not anxious, but terrified. A terror rising from somewhere deep inside him, a terror of someone who knew he had done something unforgivable. The doctor stepped out to continue treating the kids. Rebecca backed away toward their beds. Gavin turned his face away, hiding whatever expression he didn't want us to see. I stood in the center of that small room, under the harsh white fluorescent light and the sharp smell of antiseptic. Everything blurred and spun. And as I looked at my 3 family members, Gavin avoiding my eyes, Rebecca trembling, the children lying limp in their beds, I felt the scattered pieces in my memory start to fall into place. The family dinners Gavin said I didn't need to attend, the calls he ignored, the comments Rebecca made that stung like needles. "You should keep some distance so we can build our own family. You're always getting in the way. Our life doesn't need extra complication." It wasn't just distance. It was a pushing away, with intention. And now, in this cold hospital room, I finally saw it. There was something deeper, darker, more rotten inside my family than I ever imagined. Rebecca turned to me, and her eyes were different. No contempt, no coldness, only fear, guilt, and pain. She stepped forward, voice shaking. "Mom, I'm sorry. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." I placed my hand on her shoulder. "I know. Now isn't the time for blame. Just focus on the kids." Gavin spun around, eyes dark. "Don't talk like you had nothing to do with this. If you hadn't brought the cake..." "Gavin Wells, I said slowly, my voice so calm it startled even me. I brought it because I trusted you, because I thought you sent something good for me. And now you dare blame me? Gavin went silent, and that silence was louder than any confession he could have made. I looked at my son for a long time. That face used to be my pride. Those eyes once lit up every time he showed me one of his childhood drawings. Those hands once held mine when he cried because he was afraid to sleep alone. Now, none of that was there anymore. Standing in front of me was a man whose eyes kept avoiding mine, whose hands were shaking, and whose breath carried a dark secret leaking out with every exhale. When the doctor returned to say Liam was showing signs of improvement but still needed toxin monitoring, Rebecca broke down sobbing. I pulled her into my arms the way I would hold my own daughter. Gavin watched us, his face twisted, stretched tight like a string about to snap. I could see a flicker of regret on him. But regret for what? For the kids being poisoned? Or because his plan failed? I couldn't tell the difference yet. But my instinct, the same instinct that carried me through 8 decades of life, told me this. Some cracks only show when the light is strong enough. And today, that light had finally begun to break through the surface of my family. When the nurse walked in and asked us to leave so they could continue more tests, I held Rebecca's hand and squeezed gently. I'll stay here. I'm not going anywhere. Rebecca nodded. As for Gavin, he turned away, slipped out, and disappeared down the hallway like a shadow who knew his time was running out. I stood outside the hospital room, leaning against the white wall, watching my son's back grow smaller in the distance. I wanted to call him back. I wanted to believe that some part of the child I raised still existed inside that man. But the longer I watched, the colder I felt. Not the cold of the hospital, but the cold your soul feels when it finally understands. My family was rotting from the inside, and I had closed my eyes to it for far too many years. That night, after the kids were moved to the observation unit, after Rebecca curled up on the waiting room chair, and after Gavin vanished somewhere in the city, I knew this was only the beginning of a very long and very painful truth. I sat in the pediatric waiting area, my fingers interlocked so tightly my knuckles turned white. Rebecca leaned her head against the wall, her eyes swollen. Every few minutes she got up and paced a short distance like someone trapped between fear and grief, with nowhere to put either of them. The ER doors opened. The doctor stepped out, his face tense, though his voice stayed professionally calm. "We have more accurate results," he said. "The children were exposed to arsenic, low dose, but still dangerous. We'll continue monitoring and detox treatment." Arsenic. This time, the word wasn't some vague term from a crime novel. It was something flowing in the oephome veins of my grandchildren. 2 children who should be thinking about weekend homework, soccer games, and art class, not a toxin that could take their lives. Rebecca clutched her chest as if someone had squeezed her heart. I walked to her and placed my hand on her shoulder. "Rebecca, they're getting good care. They're doing everything they can." For the first time in years, she didn't pull away when I touched her. She didn't stiffen, didn't give me a polite, forced smile. She just looked at me, her eyes filled with something she had never allowed me to see before. Trust, even if only a small flicker, like the last bit of light at the end of a long tunnel. Gavin appeared a few minutes later. He moved fast, almost running, breathing hard, his coat thrown on crookedly, hair messy. He didn't look like a worried father. He looked like a man running from something, like someone who just heard the police were closing in. "What did the doctor say?" Gavin asked, but he didn't look at Rebecca or me. "Arsenic," Rebecca said, her voice hoarse. The kids were poisoned with arsenic. Gavin blinked rapidly, then glanced around as if looking for an exit. "I have to go," he said urgently. "I have something I need to handle. I can't stay." Rebecca grabbed his sleeve. "What could be more important than your children lying in the emergency room? Gavin, what is wrong with you?" He yanked his arm back, hard enough that Rebecca nearly stumbled. "I said you don't understand. I have to go." I stepped forward. "Gavin, sit down. I need to talk to you." "No, not now." "Yes, now," I said, my voice firm, "because I have a feeling you know exactly what's happening." Gavin finally looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time since all this began, and in his eyes, I didn't see worry. I didn't see pain. I saw fear. A kind of fear not directed at the children, but at himself. I stared straight into my son's eyes. "Gavin, tell me, what was in that cake?" "I don't know," he yelled. Too fast, too defensive. I did not look away. "Gavin Wells, I'm asking one last time. What was in that cake?" A second of silence fell, a second that felt like a lifetime. Then Gavin exploded. "It was supposed to be you," he screamed, his voice cracking but sharp like metal scraping steel. "Not the kids." It felt like the floor vanished beneath me. The air around us froze instantly. Rebecca slapped her hand over her mouth and collapsed to her knees. I stood there, my hand trembling, my breath breaking, my mind echoing those 7 words over and over. It was supposed to be you. That one sentence crushed 40 years of motherhood, crushed every dinner I skipped so I could buy him school clothes, crushed every night I stayed awake when he had a fever so bad he convulsed, crushed every word I ever said, every ounce of pride, every drop of unconditional love I poured into him. I looked at my son, but I no longer recognized the person standing there. Rebecca turned to me, tears streaming. "Mom, does that mean She didn't finish her sentence, but she didn't have to. We both knew. Gavin slammed his hand against the wall, his face flushed. "You always share everything, always giving things away. I send you a gift, and you give it to someone else. You've done that all your life." I don't know whether Rebecca's sobbing or the sound of my own heartbreaking was louder. "What are you talking about, Gavin?" I breathed. "I share because I thought everything was meant for the family." "No," he shouted. "You share because you don't know how to keep anything for yourself. You give everything to the whole world and expect everyone to thank you. I don't want your kindness. I want you to know your place." Rebecca screamed through her tears. "Your place? She's your mother." Gavin turned on her and pointed directly at her face. "What do you know? My mother always interferes, always shows up, always has an opinion. Without her, we'd have fewer problems." Rebecca stepped back, as if he had slapped her. I thought your mother was the problem. But you did this to her?" Gavin looked away. "I don't have time for this. I have to go." "Go where?" I asked, softly, barely recognizing my own voice. Gavin didn't answer. Then he took a step like he was about to run again. "Gavin!" I called, using the last breath of someone who had just been stabbed in the heart. "Look at me." For the first time, he looked at me for real, and in his eyes, I knew. I knew more clearly than any confession he could have made. Rebecca sobbed. "He was going to kill you. Oh God, he was going to kill you." Gavin looked at Rebecca, then at me, his face twisted, full of desperation but no remorse. Then he turned and ran. Ran like something was chasing him. Ran like if he didn't run, he'd be swallowed whole. His footsteps echoed down the tile hallway of the hospital until they faded behind a corner. I stared after my son's disappearing shadow. My legs gave out. I collapsed onto the chair like someone swept up by a storm. "I can't believe it," I whispered, holding my head. "My son. How could he?" Rebecca sat beside me, tears falling openly. No pretending, no coldness, no distance anymore. "Mom, Marjorie, I'm sorry. I was wrong to think you were a burden, wrong to think you were interfering. I didn't know he had lost all humanity." I placed my trembling hand over hers. I don't blame you." Rebecca cried like a child, raw, broken, stripped of every wall she ever put up. We sat there together, two women who had once kept their distance, once misunderstood each other, beside the beds where Liam and Emma were fighting the poison in their blood. In that moment, I realized my family had been rotting for a long time. Tonight, the paint finally peeled off, exposing the truth underneath. And that truth wasn't just that my son wanted to kill me. The truth was also that I, by trusting too much, yielding too much, loving too much, had let things spiral this far. Rebecca gripped my hand tighter. "Mom, I promise I'll be here for you. I won't let you be alone." That promise was the only light in the darkest night of my life. I left the hospital when the sky had already grown dark. The parking lot lights flickered on one by one, casting soft yellow patches across the pavement, still damp from the afternoon drizzle. Rebecca stayed with the kids. I needed a few minutes alone, not to rest, but to face what I knew I had to do next. I sat in my car, hands on the steering wheel, but not starting the engine yet. The rearview mirror reflected my eyes, red, swollen, but strangely bright. I had cried enough. I had hurt enough. And now something was rising inside me. Something I had never allowed myself to feel in 40 years of motherhood. The will to survive and defend myself. I knew where Gavin would go. He always went there whenever his life fell apart. After losing jobs, after fights with his wife, after debts he couldn't pay. My sister Paula's house. Paula had always treated Gavin like her own child. Even when he was wrong, falling apart, selfish or cruel, Paula always had one sentence to defend him. "He's just under pressure." Ever since our parents died, Paula had always been soft toward Gavin, and Gavin knew exactly how to exploit that weakness. I started the car. The hospital faded behind me, while the faces of my two grandchildren cut into my mind like a fresh wound. The drive to Paula's house was about 15 minutes. I passed quiet streets, shops that had closed early, the dim glow of street lamps. Everything looked peaceful, so unlike the chaos inside me. When I arrived, Gavin's car was parked right at the entrance, the old gray one with patches of peeling paint. I stopped the car, let the engine run a few more seconds, then turned it off. No rushing, no trembling, no fear. I walked up the steps and heard Paula's voice inside, the shaky tone of someone trying to reassure, maybe herself. I knocked. Paula opened the door after only a few seconds. Her eyes were red and swollen, clashing awkwardly with the forced smile she attempted when she saw me. "Marjorie, what are you doing here at this hour?" Her voice quivered. "Gavin is here," I said plainly. "I need to see him." Paula hesitated, blocking the doorway as if trying to keep me out. "Gavin, he just needs some time. He's panicking under pressure. You know, everything—" "I know," I cut in. "That's exactly why I need to see him." Without waiting for her reaction, I pushed the door gently and stepped inside. Paula didn't have the strength to stop me. Gavin stood in the middle of the living room, hands in his pockets, shoulders slumped, eyes hollow. But when he saw me, he didn't show fear, regret, or even hurt. He straightened, his back stiff, eyes cold like a stranger. "Oh, you're here." No emotion, no remorse, not one word asking about Rebecca or the kids. My chest tightened, but my voice stayed frighteningly calm. "Gavin," I said, "why?" He let out a short snort, looking away as if my question annoyed him. "You've lived too long," he said. "I need the inheritance." I froze as if turned to stone. Paula's eyes widened. Her hand flew to her mouth. "What did you say?" I asked again, though I knew I heard him clearly. He took a step closer, no longer hiding anything. "I saw your savings. $300,000. I'm drowning in debt. The loan sharks are closing in. I need money. And you're healthy, living your long life with no intention of slowing down. What do you need it for?" I heard Paula gasp in horror. I remained still. My hands were ice cold, but my heartbeat slowed strangely. Gavin kept going, as if he were talking about refinancing a mortgage, not murdering his own mother. "You're almost 70. You're not useful anymore. I have a family to take care of, a future. You're just taking up space." I looked straight at the face of the boy I had raised since he was 2, the same face that once buried itself in my chest during nightmares, hugged me whenever he got an A, called Mom in a shaky voice after falling off his bike, and suddenly I realized, in all those memories, I was the one holding him. He had never once held me. Paula stammered, "Gavin, what are you saying? You can't—" "Be quiet," he snapped. "I'm talking to my mother." I raised a hand to signal Paula not to speak. "Gavin," I asked, my voice even to the point I barely recognized myself, "you plan to use arsenic." He shrugged. "It's the easiest way. No trace, no suspicion. A heart attack at your age, everyone would buy it." Paula screamed, "Gavin, you're insane. Do you know the kids ate it too?" "You always share everything," he said, frowning. "It was supposed to be you. I didn't tell you to give it to anyone else. You made it complicated." Paula covered her face. As for me, my whole body felt weightless, an emptiness so deep it was frightening. But strangely, beneath the ruins, something cold and sharp flickered awake, a sliver of clarity. I didn't scream, didn't accuse, didn't beg, didn't ask why he saw his own mother as an obstacle. I only asked the one question I needed to hear to erase any last shred of hope. "You never loved me, did you?" Gavin looked at me as if I had asked the most ridiculous question in the world. "Love? You raised me, sure, but I didn't ask you to. You chose that. You don't owe anyone love, so why would I? You did what you wanted, and now I need you to give some back, that's all." Paula broke down crying. I just stood there, looking at my son, silent, a silence that hollowed out the air. Finally, I turned to Paula. "You don't need to say anything," I said softly. "You didn't cause this." Paula trembled as she came closer and held my arm. "Marjorie, I'm sorry. I didn't know. I thought, it's all right," I said. "Now you know." I looked at Gavin one last time. He stood there, out of patience, out of excuses, only the bare cruelty left. A man who once called me mother, but never saw me as anything more than a wallet. I opened the door. Cold air rushed into the living room. Standing in the doorway, I spoke in the calmest voice I had ever used, strengthened by an entire lifetime behind it. "Gavin, you chose your path, and I will choose mine." I stepped out onto the porch. The door closed behind me with a soft click, but that sound echoed inside me like a bell tolling. As I walked down the steps, I knew this more clearly than anything in my life. My revenge, not with knives, not with poison, but with truth and justice, begins tonight. If you're still listening to this story and feel the ache of a mother betrayed by her own child, please tell me where you're watching from in the comments, or leave a few words so I know we're walking through this together. I drove away from Paula's house in complete silence. Portland at night looked softer, streetlights reflecting on the damp pavement, stretching the shadow of my car into a long, dark ribbon. But inside me, nothing felt soft. No more trembling, no more crying, no more holding on. The night sky pressed against the windows, and my heart pressed against a truth I had avoided my whole life. I had to change. Not for Gavin, not for Rebecca, not for the kids. For myself. A woman who had spent more than half her life in quiet sacrifice, believing love alone was enough. But tonight I saw the true nature of the son I'd raised since he was 2. A truth I could no longer turn away from, no longer forgive, no longer soothe with tears or prayer. I parked by the park near my home, turned off the engine and leaned back in the seat. Outside, Portland was calm, as if nothing terrifying had happened. But I felt like someone who had just escaped a fire, my chest still smoldering. I inhaled deeply. And in that moment, I knew more clearly than ever, I would not let him destroy even one more minute of my life. The next morning, I walked into Attorney Martin Cole's office. Martin was an old friend of my late husband, a man who had worked in the field for 40 years, known for never losing a complicated family case. His hair was evenly gray at the sides, his face seasoned, but his eyes sharp as steel, like someone who had witnessed too many tragedies to believe in innocence. When I told him everything, from the cake, the hospital, to Gavin's confession, he sat still for a long moment, hands clasped together. "Marjorie," he said quietly, "I'm sorry you had to go through this, but you came to the right person. If you want to protect yourself and the children, we'll have to fight." "I want to," I said plainly. "Are you ready to become a different woman?" he asked, looking straight at me. I nodded. Not ready. Already beginning. Martin immediately handed me a list of tasks for the next 72 hours. Close all old accounts. Open new ones at a different bank with strict security. Change every safe lock. Update the will. Gather evidence. Prepare to charge Gavin with 3 counts: financial abuse, intentional harm, and attempted murder. Every line cut the past cleanly like a blade. For the first time in decades, I didn't feel scared signing the papers. I felt relief. 2 days later, I left the old suburban house, a place full of sweet memories, but also the place where I had quietly endured far too much. I moved into a luxury penthouse in downtown Portland, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a shimmering city at night, a white kitchen, a large bedroom with thick curtains, a living room facing the Willamette River. For the first time in my life, I lived somewhere not because my husband wanted, my son needed, or it's close to the kids' school, but because I wanted it. I placed my hand on the glass railing as the city wind brushed my hair. I was no longer the woman waiting for Gavin's calls, no longer the mother who forgave the 100th time. It was just me now, and strangely, I was enough. On the 3rd day, I met Sylvie, the therapist Martin recommended. Sylvie was around 50, French-American, with silver-streaked hair and a warm, low voice like a gentle stream. She looked at me not with judgment or pity, but as if she could see right through the armor I had worn for 40 years. "Marjorie," Sylvie said, "you don't have to be strong here. Here, you get to exist." I broke down at her first sentence, crying like someone had turned on a tap inside my chest. I told her I had imprisoned myself in the role of the perfect mother, the devoted wife, the quiet woman, I had never dared to say enough, never set boundaries, never believed I deserved protection. Sylvie listened, then said, "You've been mistaken. Marjorie, your worth isn't measured by how much you give, but by how much you allow yourself to keep. And now it's time you learn that again." When the first session ended, something inside me opened. I walked out no longer the timid woman afraid of conflict or of being disliked. For the first time, I asked myself, why did I ever need permission to be myself? A week later, I changed my appearance. Not to be pretty, not to look younger, but to see the woman I was becoming. I cut my outdated long hair, dyed it a sophisticated light brown. I tossed out the worn cardigans and replaced them with tailored, elegant suits. I wore heels I once believed I didn't deserve. I looked in the mirror, and in that moment, I saw life. Not a life to endure, a life to fight for. Martin helped me organize financial documents, and when I opened old boxes from my late husband, old booklets, labeled envelopes, I found something he left that I never knew about. 3 hidden accounts, 2 long-renewed certificates of deposit, and a long-term stock investment. Total, nearly $550,000. I froze at the number. I had lived frugally, when I didn't need to at all. And the scarier part, Gavin only knew about 1/5 of it. He thought I only had around $300,000, the amount he saw last year when I went to the hospital for tests. He saw that number and thought, my mother is weak, old, alone, the perfect target. He didn't know I was a senior accountant for 25 years, fluent in financial reporting laws, familiar with every bank security loophole. Martin looked at the papers I brought and smirked slightly. "Marjorie, you're smarter than I expected. Gavin has no idea who he's messing with." I answered without pride, only truth. He forgot who his mother is. I'll remind him. That night, in my new penthouse, I sat at the kitchen island with a small notebook. I wrote out each step of my revenge clearly. No shaking hands, no hesitation. Protect assets. Erase every path Gavin could touch. Prepare airtight legal documents. Gather proof of his debts and shady dealings. Record every call. Expose the truth at the exact moment he least expected. I stared at the handwriting. The writing was still mine, but the person writing was someone entirely different, someone I had always feared becoming, someone I should have been years ago. I set the pen down, looking out at the city lights reflected on the glass. Tiny sparks glowed in my eyes like embers waiting to ignite. I whispered, "Gavin, you made your choice. Now it's my turn." I began the new part of my life with deliberate silence. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing or planning. I lived in the penthouse, watching Portland shine every night, like a sleepless city, teaching myself not to unravel when old memories surfaced. But that peace was temporary, because to strike back, I needed the truth. And for the truth, I needed someone who could see through every lie. Martin understood that better than anyone. A few days after I moved, he called me, his voice steady as always. "Marjorie, I have someone I want you to meet, the best I've ever worked with." The next day, I arrived at Martin's office while the sun was still hanging in the sky. The glass windows on the 15th floor reflected a clear springtime Portland. But what we were about to discuss was as dark as the bottom of the Willamette River. "This is Detective Howard," Martin introduced. A man stepped in. He had to be in his 60s. Tall, rugged in the truest sense of the word, sun-darkened skin, deep wrinkles carved around his eyes like traces of 100 nights spent tailing criminals. Close-cropped gray hair, eyes sharp as a blade. But what reassured me was the way he looked directly at me. Not with pity, not with judgment, only with the respect owed to a woman climbing out of a pit. "I know your case," he said in a gravelly but steady voice, "and I'll find everything you need. No sugarcoating, no glossing over." I nodded. "I need the truth, no matter how ugly it is." Howard held my gaze for a few seconds, then said, "You'll have it." Just 3 days later, Howard returned with a stack of files so thick it startled me. I sat across from him in Martin's conference room. Overhead, lighting reflected off the dark wooden table, casting a dim glow, like the kind you'd see in an interrogation room. Howard placed the file in front of me. Documents, photos, notes, neatly gathered in a brown folder. "Ms. Marjorie," he began, his voice dropping lower, "I hope you're ready." I wasn't sure if I was, but I nodded anyway. Howard opened the file and flipped the first page. "Gavin owes nearly $70,000 in gambling debt." I leaned back in my chair. That number wasn't just big. It was a pit. Howard continued, as if he knew pausing would only make the shock hit me harder. "And that's just the surface. He borrowed from 3 other sources, a West Coast loan shark outfit and 2 enforcers in the Pearl District. These are photos of him meeting them." He pushed the stack toward me. Gavin stood in a dark parking lot next to a black SUV. 3 tattooed men surrounded him, one handing him an envelope. Gavin's face was tense, his hands shaking. I flipped through more photos. One of him in a dim red-lit bar, talking to a man wearing a thick gold chain. Another of him walking out of a pawn shop. Another of him leaving the house with a large bag. Howard said those were Rebecca's belongings he sold. Every picture felt like a knife. Not because I didn't suspect debt, but because I never imagined his desperation had dragged him into places this dark. "Why?" I whispered. "Why did he let it get this far?" Howard sighed. "Gambling addicts lose their stopping point. When they lose, they borrow to recover. When no one will lend, they sell. When there's nothing left to sell, they take risks. And when the risks fail, they turn to crime." I knew exactly what he was talking about. My chest trembled, but I didn't allow tears to fall. Martin added, "Marjorie, Gavin trying to harm you wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. His debt and the pressure from dangerous people pushed him." Howard nodded. "Those loan sharks aren't gentle. He has only a few weeks before they deal with him. If he can't pay, they'll come knocking." I closed the file. My hands trembled. "That's why he wanted the inheritance." "Exactly," Howard said. "And he knew you were the only one with enough money to save him." Martin looked at me carefully. "If you don't act, those people will go after Gavin. And when they can't find him, they'll go after anyone connected to him." I lifted my head. "You mean they could come for Rebecca, for the kids?" "It's possible," Martin said, "which is why we need to move fast, quietly, and securely." That evening, I went to the hospital to see Rebecca. The children's room felt warmer now, less of the harsh antiseptic smell, soft golden light falling over the small sleeping faces of the 2 kids. Rebecca sat beside Liam's bed, her eyes exhausted but softening into a faint smile when she saw me. "You're here," she whispered. I sat next to her, and I told her everything. No sugarcoating, no softening, no gentle phrasing to spare her feelings. I told her about the gambling debt, the $70,000, the things he sold, the emptied savings accounts for Liam and Emma, the men in parking lots, the West Coast loan shark crew, the truth that Gavin was no longer hovering on the edge of wrongdoing. He had crossed completely over. Rebecca listened in shock, not interrupting once. When I handed her a copy of the kids' savings account with a balance of $0, she didn't cry immediately. She just stared at the page for a long time, as if each number was draining the breath from her lungs. Finally, she set the paper down, covered her face, and broke down, loud, aching sobs, stripped of pride. I didn't know he'd gone this far. I was so stupid, so blind. I wrapped my arms around her, gentle, forgiving, without blame. "Rebecca, this is not your fault," I said. "You loved your husband. You trusted him. Anyone would have, I understand." Rebecca lifted her tear-streaked face. "But he tried to hurt you, and he hurt the kids. I can't believe it." I cupped her cheek and wiped away a tear. "It's all right now, Rebecca. We're on the same side. For the kids, and for this new life we're building." Rebecca grabbed my hand and held on tight, as though letting go would make her collapse. "Mom, Marjorie," she whispered, her voice shaky but clearer than ever. "I'll stand with you, from now on, for Liam, for Emma, and for myself, too." I gave her a tired but genuine smile. "Thank you, Rebecca." In that moment, for the first time, we were no longer mother-in-law and daughter-in-law. We were two women betrayed by the same man, and more importantly, two mothers trying to save their children from the sins of their father. A month passed after the night I walked out of Paula's house, the night I finally saw that Gavin was no longer the child I once knew. That month felt like a year, long, but for the first time, I felt I was truly living. I spent those weeks preparing everything, financial, legal, emotional, personal. I met Sylvie weekly, learning to escape the cycle of self-blame and to see myself without the lens of roles and obligations. I met Martin often, going over documents, revising every detail, planning every next step. Rebecca and I began speaking more. Not polite, strained small talk, but real conversations between two women who had suffered and were trying to rise again. The kids improved with treatment. In the afternoons, I visited the hospital. Rebecca sat beside Emma's bed, and Liam texted me, asking if I'd bring sugar-free pudding. I sat with them, read stories, or simply rested my hand on their legs so they knew I was there. No one mentioned Gavin. No one dared hope he would change. And then, one day, Martin said, "It's time for you to be seen." I looked at him, waiting. If Gavin thinks you're scared or hiding, he'll get careless. We need him to understand you're in control. Showing up at the right moment will shake him. I understood instantly. A wounded animal attacks, but an animal being watched, cornered under a spotlight, panics. "The fundraising gala this week," Martin continued. "He'll be there. I checked the guest list, and I think you should go." I inhaled deeply. I knew the gala he meant, an annual Portland arts event. Long evening gowns, crisp suits, expensive wine, a grand piano, speeches, and polite smiles. I used to attend with my husband years ago. Gavin also showed up sometimes, whenever he needed to polish his image for grants on projects that never materialized. That evening, I opened the wardrobe in my new apartment. The old clothes were gone. I had donated most of them. I picked the black suit I bought last week. Sharp tailoring, clean lines, high collar, fabric soft as silk but structured with strength. I tied my freshly styled hair into a low bun, letting a few strands frame my temples. When I looked in the mirror, I saw a woman who had never before been allowed into the light, strong, calm, defined, no longer begging anyone to accept her. I smiled faintly. "There you are," I said to the reflection. The gala entrance was even grander than I remembered. Golden light poured over marble floors. Abstract paintings lined the walls. Tables were arranged with elegant displays of food. A string ensemble played slow classical music, each note deliberate. My heels clicked softly on the floor as I entered. No one recognized me, and that was exactly what I wanted. People glanced at me with polite curiosity, perhaps wondering if I was a CEO or the head of some foundation. I let them wonder. For the first time in my life, I wasn't Gavin Wells's mother, the Wells widow, or the frail Mrs. Marjorie who stayed in the background. I was simply myself. I took a sip of red wine, felt the familiar dry finish on my tongue, but tonight, the taste carried a different meaning. I walked slowly around the room, taking in the music and the chatter. No one knew I was looking for someone until I saw him. Gavin stood near the reception table, wearing a freshly pressed coat that couldn't hide how gaunt he had become. His face was tight, eyes sunken, jaw marked by tiny stress sores, signs of sleepless nights. He was trying to talk to an elderly donor with white hair, but the man shook his head, and I watched Gavin swallow hard. I moved toward him, slow, steady. My steps felt light, but to me, each one was a pair of scissors cutting through 40 years of pain. When I got within a few feet, Gavin turned. His eyes widened as if he'd seen a ghost, not because he recognized me, but because he didn't. I stood before him, black suit, new hair, calm face, eyes bright like sparks, sharpened by suffering. He opened his mouth. "Mom?" His voice was so small I almost missed it. I lifted the corner of my lips, not a smile, but absolute control. "Hello, son." Gavin stepped back. I saw both his hands tremble. For a month he believed I'd be afraid, shrinking, hiding, crying, begging. But the woman standing before him was not the one he once dismissed. He stammered, "Mom, you look much better than the day you tried to send me to my grave?" I asked softly, almost whispering. The white-haired donor stared between us in shock and quietly stepped aside. People nearby began to notice, not because I was loud, but because the silence had thickened like fog. Gavin swallowed hard, lips paling. "Mom, what do you want here? I stepped closer. "I just came to say hello, because tonight I'm not hiding anymore." His eyes darted nervously, like a cornered animal searching for an escape route. I leaned in slightly and repeated the exact line he threw at me that day in the hospital. The line I would never forget. Time to collect. His face drained of color as if someone had pulled the blood straight out of it. Not because I spoke loudly, but because I said it softly. So softly that every word seemed to slide into his ear, leaving him nowhere to run. I turned and walked away, leaving him standing there, trembling under the warm golden lights of the elegant hall. I could almost feel his spine curve, his knees weaken. His fear was so thick it felt tangible in the air. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I knew he was afraid, truly afraid. Not afraid of humiliation, but afraid of being exposed. That night, when I returned to the penthouse, Portland was glowing once more, lights rippling across the surface of the Willamette River like soft ribbons. I stepped onto the balcony, the breeze lifting my hair, and I felt like a different person. Not because of the glamorous gala, not because I made Gavin falter, but because I had taken the single most important step in the journey of a mother pushed to the edge. I was no longer a victim. Around 11 p.m., I opened my laptop on the kitchen counter. The blue light reflected across my face, sharpening the features I had only recently learned to love again. I opened the email Martin had prepared for me. Preliminary complaint. List of evidence. Instructions for filing with the district. Attorney's office. I place my fingers on the keyboard, no shaking, no hesitation. I selected, submit, file initial report. Just one click. A tiny chime sounded, and in that moment, I knew. I had stepped into a battle with no way back. No more softness, no more illusions born from motherly love. I whispered steady and quiet. You made your choice. Now I make mine. When I pressed submit, sending every legal document to the prosecutor's office, a hollow but liberating feeling washed over me. It wasn't the satisfaction of revenge. It was the sensation of laying down new bricks for my life. For the first time built on my terms, not on duty or a warped sense of motherly obligation. The following week unfolded exactly as Martin and I planned. Yet oddly, even though the plan was mine, every step felt cold as steel. Cold, but necessary. Rebecca was the first person I helped. She arrived at the law office that Monday morning. Gone were the tears of the hospital. In their place, exhaustion, yes, but also a fragile resolve. She handed her kids to the temporary sitter, sat across from me, and said, "Mom, I want a divorce, and I want full custody of Liam and Emma." I placed my hand over hers. We'll make it happen, and we'll win. We didn't need many words. We understood this wasn't just ending a marriage. It was saving 2 children from a father who had fallen to the bottom of cruelty. Martin and his team drafted the divorce petition, the request for full custody, and the restraining order. All the evidence Howard gathered, the drained savings accounts, the photos with loan sharks, the debt reports, even pictures of Rebecca's belongings being sold, went into the file. These alone are enough for the court to give Rebecca full custody, Martin said, and to keep Gavin away from the kids. Rebecca nodded, pain in her eyes, but no wavering. I'll do anything for my children. I looked at her and felt a deep ache, not because she was weak, but because she had been too strong for too long in a marriage that should never have demanded this of her. Meanwhile, I officially filed attempted murder charges against Gavin. Intentional, premeditated, backed by physical evidence and his own words. I even included the recording from Paula's house where he admitted, "You've lived too long, I need the inheritance." That confession was a blade he had plunged into himself. Martin said, "We don't need him to sign anything, his words already condemned him." I nodded, my chest heavy. I wasn't doing this to get revenge. I was doing this because if I stayed silent, he would hurt someone else. Rebecca, the kids, or even himself. The next step was the house. Gavin had pawned the family home 3 months ago. Rebecca didn't know. When she found out, she nearly collapsed. That house. It's where the kids grew up. Her voice cracked. I made a hard decision. Partly from responsibility. Partly because I couldn't let the children live in instability created by Gavin's chaos. I paid Gavin's remaining debt, all $38,000, under one condition. Rebecca had to transfer full ownership of the house to herself, removing Gavin entirely, even his signature. Martin agreed. You're protecting Rebecca and the kids while cutting Gavin off completely. Rebecca cried when I handed her the paperwork. Mom, you didn't have to. I shook my head. I'm not doing it for Gavin. I'm doing it for you and the children. She hugged me. A real hug. Not polite, not reluctant. 3 days later, Gavin returned to the house in the suburbs, the one he once called his, the one he mortgaged behind Rebecca's back, the one he treated like property. He turned the doorknob. Locked. He tried the back door. Also locked. He called Rebecca. She didn't answer. He banged on the door, shouted. For the first time, the neighbors didn't stay silent. They called the police. When officers arrived, Rebecca showed the restraining order. The look on Gavin's face as he was forced to leave, fear, bewilderment, anger crushed under helplessness, was indescribable. He stood on the street watching the house sealed shut, watching his wife refuse to look at him, watching neighbors whisper. In that moment, he realized the world he built on manipulation and entitlement had collapsed. And that was only the beginning. 2 weeks later, the media published the first headline, "Portland man suspected of poisoning mother to obtain inheritance." No mention of me, no address, just his name. And then another article, a local news channel, a few blogs. The story spread faster than I expected. Gavin called me. I didn't answer. He texted, "What are you doing?" I stayed silent. One evening, I stumbled on his live stream. He looked hollowed out, eyes wild, hair matted like someone who hadn't slept in days. He told the camera, "It's not true. I never tried to hurt my mom. They're lying about me." But comments flooded in. "You're lying. Police don't investigate nothing. You sold your wife's stuff and blame everyone else? You're terrified of the loan sharks chasing you." The more he spoke, the more he incriminated himself. He ended the stream abruptly when pounding sounded at his motel door. The loan sharks looking for him. After that, he slept in his car, hid in public bathrooms, or crouched behind convenience stores open 24 hours. He was truly unraveling. He lost his job. The company emailed a notice of termination. Severe damage to the organization's public image. Rebecca forwarded me the email. I read it with a strange calm, not joy, not triumph, just calm, as if everything unfolding was simply the universe correcting itself. But what made me calmest wasn't his downfall, nor his debts, nor the cracks in his facade. It was this. For the first time in my life, I understood the value of rising up. For myself, for Rebecca, for Liam and Emma. For all the years I endured his cold words without daring to fight back. Watching him lose control under the weight of his own actions didn't bring me pleasure. It brought me justice. A justice that finally arrived, late, painful, but inevitable. One evening, standing in my penthouse overlooking Portland's bright skyline, I closed my eyes and whispered, "Son, this isn't me destroying you. This is you destroying yourself. I'm simply not holding you up anymore." I thought I was ready for the moment Gavin would be arrested. But when the notification buzzed on my phone, a message from Martin. "They've arrested Gavin. Charges filed." I froze. I was in the kitchen, a gray Portland morning lingering outside the window, mist clinging to the glass. The warmth of my teacup curled around my fingers, but I felt like I drifted out of my own body. No joy, no shock, no anguish, just a vast, quiet stillness. After 40 years, I finally understood what it meant to let go of someone who once called me Mom, not out of hatred, but because the truth left no other path. 3 days later came the first hearing. Gavin was kept in the Multnomah County Jail, awaiting trial for premeditated attempted murder. On top of that were Rebecca's divorce papers, the restraining order, and the debt records loan sharks submitted to protect themselves. I appeared in court wearing my familiar black suit, hair neatly tied back. Rebecca sat beside me, eyes swollen but steady. The children were at school with a sitter. Martin and his team reviewed documents one last time before the session. "Marjorie," Martin said, "we're prepared. Today is only procedural, but understand, this case will be long. The evidence is heavy, and Gavin will fight." I nodded. "I'm ready." In that moment, I knew the truth ahead would hurt. but it was the pain required to heal the rest of my life. The official trial began 2 weeks later. The Multnomah County Courthouse was always crowded, but that morning felt different, heavy. Reporters gathered outside, barred from entering the courtroom but eager for updates. As I stepped inside, it felt like walking into a room where every memory of my life had been summoned. Rebecca sat beside me, her hand trembling until I held it. We took our seats in the front row. Martin stood by us. Across the room, Gavin was brought in. I will never forget that moment. He had lost at least 30 pounds. The orange jumpsuit hung loosely on him. His wrists bore red marks from the cuffs. His hair was a mess, jaw unshaven, eyes sunken from nights without sleep. But what hurt me most was not his appearance. It was his eyes. The same eyes he had the night I left Paula's house. Fearful, furious, desperate, and most devastatingly, unrepentant. He glanced at me, then quickly looked away, as if my presence burned him. I didn't shake. I didn't cry. I looked at him with absolute calm. The prosecutor opened, voice steady and clear. Mrs. Marjorie Wells is the victim of a deliberate attempted homicide. The defendant, Gavin Wells, prepared arsenic and placed it in a box of walnut cookies specifically intended for his mother, with the goal of causing fatality in order to obtain inheritance funds. The courtroom buzzed with whispers. Gavin dropped his head. The prosecutor continued. We have medical reports confirming arsenic in both children, hospital surveillance of the defendant's panic, investigative photos of the defendant meeting loan sharks, and most importantly, a recording of the defendant verbally admitting his intent. The room fell still. Gavin shot up from his seat. That's a setup. My mother tricked me. She framed me. The judge struck the gavel. Defendant, sit down. But Gavin kept yelling. Rebecca planned everything. She wants to take my kids. All of them want to ruin me. Rebecca winced. I placed a hand on her back, steady and calm. For weeks, the trial became the center of local media attention. Reporters weren't allowed inside, but they waited every day by the doors. Each afternoon as we stepped out, dozens of questions rang out. Mrs. Wells, are you afraid your son will seek revenge? Rebecca, do you believe Gavin can change? Do you think Gavin did it for money or because of pressure? I didn't answer. Rebecca didn't either. We stayed silent. The kind of silence needed when you want the truth to speak for itself. During arguments, Gavin's attorney tried to create another story. Gavin didn't intend to harm anyone. He was under debt pressure, mentally unstable. It was just a moment of impulse. But the prosecutor responded with a sentence that made the courtroom stop breathing. Debt doesn't make someone put arsenic in their own mother's food. The jury stayed quiet. Gavin bowed his head, but when the prosecutor played the recording, he snapped up, eyes wide. She was supposed to eat it, not the kids. You've lived too long. I need the inheritance money. Gavin screamed, I didn't say that. That's not my voice. But everyone in the courtroom knew he said it, and he wasn't sorry. In the end, the jury needed only 2 hours to decide. They returned to the courtroom, faces solemn. The judge asked, Have you reached a verdict? The jury foreman stood up. Your Honor, we find the defendant, Gavin Wells, guilty of premeditated attempted homicide. No one said anything. No one breathed loudly. No one moved. Gavin collapsed into his chair, hands shaking violently. No, Mom, how could you do this to me? The judge announced, 14 years in prison, with no parole for the first 6. The sound of the gavel hit like a blade severing the rest of his life. Rebecca burst into tears, covering her face. I turned and held her, and she fell into my shoulder like a child desperate for shelter. Not because we were happy, not because we won, but because everything was finally over. Or at least, the worst part of it. When the officers walked Gavin past us, he looked at me, not with hatred, but with disbelief. "I'm your blood," he whispered. "Why would you do this to me?" I answered softly like a breath. "I didn't do this to you. You did this to me. I simply stopped protecting you." Gavin was taken away, feet dragging, head down. That image I will never forget for as long as I live. But I didn't shake. I didn't collapse. I didn't feel the old kind of pain. All I felt was emptiness. A distant, peaceful kind of emptiness, like the air after a storm finally passes. Outside the courthouse, Portland was drizzled with light rain. Rebecca wrapped her arms around me. "Mom, because of you, my kids and I are safe." I squeezed her shoulder lightly. "Not because of me. Because you were brave enough to leave first." The children ran to her legs, then to me. Liam stood on tiptoe to wrap his arms around my waist, and Emma rested her head against my hip. I held all three of them close. In that moment, I understood. I had lost Gavin. A part of my heart would always mourn that. But mourning doesn't mean going back. And I also understood. I had saved another family. Rebecca, Liam, Emma. And saved myself from decades of darkness. That evening, I returned to the penthouse. Streetlights spilled across the Willamette River, glowing like gold ribbons on the water. I stood by the glass wall, closed my eyes, and let my breath settle slowly. I didn't feel victory. I didn't feel joy, only relief, the kind only survivors of storms truly understand. I was no longer the woman others could manipulate. No longer the mother trying to patch cracks that couldn't be saved. No longer the faint shadow in someone else's life. I whispered, "At last, I'm free." After the trial, after the final strike of the gavel, I walked out of the courthouse as if stepping out of a dark room I had been trapped in for half a lifetime. The early winter Portland air was cold, but my heart was strangely calm. No more fear of Gavin showing up at my door. No more hearing his footsteps pacing at night. No more enduring harsh words or cold stares that crushed my spirit. I was free, a freedom not given by anyone, but reclaimed by me. But that freedom wasn't only for me, it was for women like me. Women who had lived too long inside invisible walls of sacrifice, guilt, and endurance. So I decided to do something I never thought I would be strong enough to do. I created a foundation. It started as a small idea, flickering in my mind for weeks after Gavin's sentencing. One evening, while pouring tea in my kitchen overlooking the city, I remembered my sessions with Sylvie and the stories she told. Older women enduring emotional abuse, exploitation, disrespect, stripped of control over their own lives. It was heartbreaking. I was not an exception, only one of thousands silenced. I picked up my phone and called Martin. "Martin," I said, "I want to start a support foundation for older women facing domestic abuse. I want them to have a place to go, a voice, someone who believes them." Martin went silent for a few seconds, then said, with a warmth I rarely heard from him, "Marjorie, I think that's the best thing you could ever do." We began working. I used part of the $550,000 my late husband left me, the amount I found early in my journey, as seed funding. I chose the name Second Dawn Foundation. The name made my heart tremble for the first time in months. Because this wasn't only my second dawn, it was for the women still waiting for theirs. Rebecca was the first person I told. She stayed quiet for a long time after hearing it. You want to help women who went through what you did? I want to help women who went through what we did, I said, placing my hand over hers. Rebecca burst into tears, but not the painful kind. This time it was gratitude, recognition of her own worth, and the relief of stepping out of the dark. Mom, she said through tears, I want to go back to school. I want to study psychology. I want to help women like us. I squeezed her hand. Do it, Rebecca. I believe in you. And she did. She enrolled in a community psychology program at Portland State University. She studied in the mornings, cared for the kids in the afternoons, and volunteered at the foundation in the evenings. She poured her heart into every call from older women seeking help. For the first time, I saw her shine. Liam and Emma became two tiny sons warming my heart again. Every weekend they came to my apartment. Liam knocked with 3 familiar taps. Emma ran in and hugged my legs as if I were the safest place on earth. Grandma, do you have pudding? Grandma, I brought my new drawing. Among the potted plants on my balcony, with children's laughter filling the air, I learned the meaning of family again. Not a family by blood, not a family by paper, a family that chooses each other. Rebecca often sat beside me on the sofa as we watched the kids play. You know, she said one afternoon, sunlight washing over her face, I used to think you were just quiet and gentle. I never realized you were this strong. I looked at her. Not strong, Rebecca. I just didn't want to be hurt anymore. As the foundation gained official approval, media attention grew. First a small magazine interview, then a local TV segment, then a national show. I never revealed every detail of the case. I kept the most painful parts private, but I shared enough for some 60 or 70-year-old woman sitting alone in a living room to think, if she could do it, maybe I can too. And they came. They wrote letters. They called. They lined up outside halls where I spoke. During seminars, I stood on stage and looked at rows of elderly women, some with silver hair, some in old cardigans, some clutching small handbags like holding their trembling youth. Many cried as they listened. One elderly woman took my hand afterward. Mrs. Wells, I thought I was the only one whose child treated me badly. Turns out we have each other. I hugged her, my heart softening. In their eyes I saw myself years ago, fragile, enduring until I had nothing left. And silently I thanked God, thanked fate for leading me out of that place. I also relearned how to love myself, not through makeup or expensive clothes, but by caring for my mental health, protecting boundaries, and placing myself first. I learned how to use money to protect me, not to please others. I bought a new balcony chair because I liked it, not because Gavin once called the old one outdated. I ate dinner at the restaurant I liked. I took small trips, alone, for the first time in decades. The comfortable life I live now isn't to show off. It's a reminder that I spent a lifetime enduring. And now I deserve better. No one controls me anymore. No one spends my money. No one uses age, weakness, or harsh words to crush my worth. I look in the mirror each night and smile gently. I'm back, and I'm stronger than ever. One afternoon, while Rebecca was at school and the kids were in class, I sat on the balcony watching the sunset. The last light stretched across the Willamette River like a golden silk ribbon. I closed my eyes and breathed. I'm grateful, I whispered, grateful for this second chance. But I knew. My story wasn't finished. Not because there were battles left, not because revenge wasn't complete, but because life doesn't end with a neat period. It opens new doors. And at 70, I was stepping into the widest one yet, a door leading to healing, to freedom, to the woman I was always meant to be. 3 years passed since Gavin's sentencing. It sounds long, but to me it felt like a gentle breath the universe finally returned to me. My life settled. The foundation grew. Rebecca was close to graduating. My grandchildren thrived. And I became the version of myself I never thought I'd meet again. But that peace was stirred by a pale yellow envelope the mail carrier placed carefully in my hand on a rainy Portland afternoon. The top corner showed the prison's return address, sender, Gavin Wells. I stood frozen for a long moment before opening it. Not because I was afraid of him, but because I was afraid I might feel something I no longer wanted to feel. Afraid of pity, afraid of softening, afraid that 40 years of being a mother would try to slip back through the cracks I had worked so hard to close. I tore the envelope slowly, as if each rip of paper was a piece of the past that needed to be opened one last time. Inside, Gavin wrote neatly, a handwriting I had forgotten he once had. He began with an apology. The words sounded sincere, but beneath them I sensed something hazy. Mom, I know everything was my fault, but you also have to understand my situation. The moment I read the word, but, I exhaled. Just one word, and I could already hear Gavin's voice from 3 years ago. Smooth, cold, always twisting the truth, so he never had to take full responsibility. Then he wrote, I'm begging you to visit me. Just once. So I know you haven't really abandoned me. Abandoned? I let out a laugh, not the kind born of amusement, but a long exhale pulling decades of exhaustion out of my chest. Abandoned? Who abandoned whom? He abandoned his children when he ran from loan sharks. He abandoned Rebecca when the truth broke her. He abandoned me, the woman who raised him since he was 2, by trying to kill me with poisoned chocolate cakes. If anyone had been abandoned, I thought, it was me. For 40 years. I folded the letter but didn't throw it away. I took it to my therapist, Sylvie, that same afternoon. Sylvie had been with me since the days after the first hearing, when my mind was still tangled between being a mother and being a victim, between duty and damage. She looked at me with calm eyes, neither judging nor rushing. I handed her the letter. Sylvie read it slowly. Then she set it on the table, so gently the paper made no sound. How did you feel reading it? She asked. I leaned back in the chair, looking out the window at the Portland rain falling in thin threads. I felt empty, I said. Not angry, not pity, just empty. Sylvie nodded. And what makes you hesitate about visiting him? I stayed silent for a long time. Because I'm afraid. If I don't go, I'm a bad mother. My voice was so small it nearly dissolved into the rain. Sylvie tilted her head, studying me. Marjorie, she said gently but firmly, I want to ask you something. What makes you want to see someone who once tried to kill you? The question pierced the softest part of my heart. I met her eyes. Maybe. Because for 40 years, I believe mothers had to forgive, had to stay, had to endure, I whispered. Sylvie nodded slowly. But you're no longer the woman from those 40 years. You're the woman who rebuilt herself after loss, the woman who saved herself. You don't owe Gavin a single visit. My chest felt lighter, as if someone had finally lifted the invisible weight I'd carried since I was 20. I think, I told Sylvie, Gavin wants me to return to the weak mother I once was, the one who overlooked every mistake, the the one who lifted him every time he fell, even when he was the one pushing me over the edge. Exactly, Sylvie said. He wants you back inside the mold you shattered, and you have the right to refuse. I drew a long breath. Maybe I already knew the answer before I came here. That evening I sat at my desk. The lamp cast a warm glow, the curtains softened the shadows, and outside, the rain tapped steadily. I opened a blank sheet of paper and picked up my pen. I wrote his name first, Gavin Wells, without shaking, without anger. Then I wrote my final letter to him. Gavin, I received your letter. I hope what you wrote was sincere, and that in these past years you've had time to see the consequences of your actions. But I need to tell you this. I cannot come to the prison to see you, not because I hold resentment, but because I am no longer the lifeline you reach for every time you drown in your own choices. I paused, closing my eyes. Something deep inside me felt undone, like the last knot of a rope that had been tied around my heart for decades. I continued. I've learned that people only truly change when they run out of people to blame. And I refuse to be the person you blame even one more time. I hope you find the remorse you mentioned. I hope you learn to take responsibility like an adult. But my path no longer runs beside yours. I sign this, Marjorie Wells. Not Mom. No longer Mom. I was no longer the title he had trampled so easily. I folded the letter, placed it in an envelope, and sealed it. When I dropped it into the outgoing mailbox, I felt as if I had set down a part of my life that had been heavy for far too long. Strangely, I didn't cry. I didn't tremble. I didn't regret. I just felt light. Lighter than I'd ever felt. The next day, as I walked to the foundation office, Portland was bright in a rare way. Sunlight glinted off rain-soaked branches, and the Willamette shimmered like liquid glass. I stood by the riverbank, hands in my coat pockets, my hair lifting gently in the wind. I'm truly free, I whispered. Not just free of Gavin, not just free of 40 years of darkness, but free of the worn-out, self-sacrificing version of myself, free from the pressure of being the proper mother, free from emotional debts, free from the illusion that enough love could change someone. I was free to live, to love, to build, to heal. I thought of the women who came to the foundation. I thought of the elderly women who hugged me and cried. I thought of Rebecca and my grandchildren. I thought of every life I had touched, and those I would touch in the future, and I smiled. I knew my journey had closed the old chapter, but new doors ahead were wide open. And me? I stepped into that light as someone entirely new. For the first time in 70 years, I was unafraid. Years passed since I mailed my final letter to Gavin. My new life flowed gently, like cool water over stones once rough. Every morning in my sunlit penthouse, I felt grateful that I chose to stand up, to save myself at a moment when it felt too late. But it turned out it's never too late for an older woman to start again. Second Dawn Foundation grew faster than I ever imagined. From a tiny office with 2 desks and a few worn chairs, we now had a full support center where older women could come, talk, receive legal guidance, and, most importantly, be heard without judgment. Hundreds of women came through those doors, some with snow-white hair, walking slowly, some trembling because it was the first time they dared speak aloud secrets they'd buried for decades. Some came just for a hug, a word of comfort, a reminder they weren't invisible. I saw myself in each of them. a woman who once believed sacrifice was duty, endurance was virtue, and family bonds had to be preserved no matter how twisted. Now they stood up, reclaiming their lives. Witnessing that warmed my heart every time. Rebecca, my daughter-in-law, became our lead counselor. She appeared in newspapers, on television, at statewide conferences. When people asked why she chose this path, she always answered, "Because my mother-in-law saved my family with the strength she spent a lifetime searching for." Every time I heard that, my throat tightened. Not from sadness, but from a recognition I had never known. Rebecca had changed so much that it was hard to remember she was once cold toward me. Now she lifted other women the way I once lifted her. Liam and Emma grew stronger than I expected. They became the two small lights brightening my later years. Liam matured into a boy who loved helping others, while Emma proudly told friends I was the hero of the family. I laughed every time. A hero? I was only a grandmother who lived longer than her own pain, but to them, I was proof a family can be reborn after ruin. One year, I received an award honoring contributions to the senior community of Oregon. I wore a cream suit, James's pearl necklace, and stepped onto the stage in long applause. Holding the small trophy, I felt I was holding my entire journey. From the dark kitchen where I was treated like a burden, to the lit stage where I stood as a woman of strength and worth. One autumn night, Portland was chilly. I sat on my balcony with a soft wool scarf around my neck, watching the city light up like scattered stars. The wind carried the scent of rain and dry maple leaves. I closed my eyes, letting time pass over me like a slow-moving film. I remembered the day Gavin stood in the hospital and said that sentence I'll never forget. I remembered the night I pulled my keys from Paula's door, my heart hollow. I remembered signing the complaint against my own son, remembered the trial, Rebecca's tears on my shoulder, remembered the prison letter the moment I signed Marjorie instead of Mom. I had endured everything a lifetime could hold, and I survived. Not just survived. I bloomed from the ashes life left behind. I opened my eyes to the dancing lights below, and I realized something simple, yet it took a lifetime to understand. The one who tried to kill me inadvertently helped me be reborn. If Gavin hadn't pushed me to the edge of death, I might never have been born again, never known my strength, never lived such a beautiful life in my final years. My story didn't end in tragedy. It ended in power, a power I paid dearly for, but never regretted. I knew my story wasn't just mine. Every day I retold it, in halls, on TV, or through handwritten letters to elderly women trying to step out of the dark. I knew someone out there saw themselves in my words. I couldn't save everyone. But if I could save even one person, then every pain I endured had meaning. Night settled. The city grew quiet as if someone had placed a hand over its heart. A deep peace spread through my body like I was being gently held by the life I fought to reclaim. I leaned back and whispered, "At last, I am completely free. Free from fear, free from shame, free from the roles society forced onto mothers, and free to live the final chapter of my life as a woman it took me decades to find again." I smiled, closed my eyes, and let my breath melt into the cool night air. And I knew, from this moment on, the past can no longer bind me. My life had closed every shadow and opened a dawn no one could take away. Thank you for staying with me until the end of my story. If you're still here and this journey touched your heart, I would truly love to know where you're watching from. Please tell me in the comments. Even a small message lets me know we're still walking together. And if you want to hear more stories of strength, family, and rebirth in our later years. Please like, comment, and subscribe. From the bottom of my heart, thank you for sharing your time with me today.